This episode is proudly sponsored by Resilience Through Fitness. RTF's whole body health approach focuses on helping first responders get adequate rest, fuel, and physical preparedness for their challenging shifts serving the communities they love. The RTF coaching staff are all current first responders that have a passion for fitness. With one-on-one online coaching tailored specifically to your gym, home, and traveling needs, the staff strives to ensure that you come home safe at the end of the shift. RTF also donates a portion of select sales back to supporting veteran and first responder charities. Use the discount code GRITTY15 for 15% off your personalized coaching or next order online. That's GRITTY15 at resilience-through-fitness.com. All one word, resilience-through-fitness.com. Welcome to Blue Grit Radio, the podcast that explores making better cops for a better community. I'm your host, Eric Tung. I've been an active police officer since 2007. We will dive into the aspects of police culture, health and wellness, leadership, and mindset. You'll hear from experts not only from policing, but all industries as they relate to being our best with purpose, passion, and positivity. Join me as we share stories, lessons, and advice so we can all be better for ourselves, our teams, our families, and our communities. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to another episode of Blue Grit Radio. This is your host, Eric. Today, I am joined by a returning guest, Joey. Joey, thanks for coming back on the show, man.
Hey, thanks so much for having me back on it. It really is an honor. I love what you're doing with your podcast, and I'm really happy with some of the feedback I got last time, so hopefully today is good as well.
Oh, I'm sure it will be. Yeah, so Joey, for those that don't know, his handle on Instagram, the 9mm Musashi, like, the alliteration was purposeful as you described in our prior episode, and then I just, stutter on it. So that episode is episode 67. It's Balance in All Things, where you talk a lot about your coming into service, your military service, your law enforcement service. So if you don't know, go check that episode out as well, and you can learn a lot more about Joey. But Joey, could you please reintroduce yourself or a brief intro for those that may not have heard that episode?
Yeah, absolutely. My name is Joey. I was born in Kyoto, Japan, moved to America when I was pretty young. Got to go to UCLA on an Army scholarship. I am still in the reserve working on getting out, but I'm a captain right now. Full-time, I am a police officer in the Bay Area. I started off with LAPD, lateraled up to the Bay a few years ago. I'm on my full-time gig's patrol, but I work our firearms unit, our SWAT team, and I'm a first aid instructor as well. And most importantly, I am a husband and a father.
Yeah, man. I love how you end with most importantly, because it's been a theme that's come up a lot in recent episodes and some of my writing, which is that, we, and I literally mean we, like myself included, clearly I spend a lot of time being a cop in my full-time job and then thinking about all these police related matters. And it is a huge piece of my life, but any recognition on identity and fleshing out and enhancing the other aspects of our identity, because the fact is, one day we're going to hang up the uniform, we're going to hang up the badge and the gun and the belt and the vest, and we should hopefully still be a family man. We should be, mothers and sisters and community members and friends, runners, cyclists, what have you, right?
Yeah, I'm a big proponent of having a life outside of the job. I recommend that cops not hang out with cops all the time. It turns into just telling war stories, and just have an identity, be a person outside of this job. I'm not like that's being a police officer is not my identity. I do a lot of law enforcement stuff just like you. What I didn't mention in the intro, I run police post training, which is I do have an awesome opportunity to talk to a lot of people around the world really about law enforcement, but everything I do is for my family, and that kind of guides a lot of what I do as a police officer. Is I want to be doing the job in a way that my wife and daughter are proud of me. And I think obviously not everyone's married, not everyone has children, but having a solid foundation in who you are outside of the job, I think is critical to keeping yourself grounded and avoiding some of the mental pitfalls that come with this job.
Yeah, I love that. And that's exactly why the title of our first conversation was Balance in All Things. I mean, you have this very balanced, this very kind of Zen approach to things, right? You're very mindful. It's actually why it really stands out as one of the episodes I wanted to feature, and I'll plug this upcoming online based course, which is getting gritty, and it's a lot about mindset, and it's about a lot about building routines and healthy practice for work-life balance. So that's where there's a whole slide of like episodes for me that stick out that I'd want everyone to listen to. And mindset, like you're one of those featured out of shoot at the time of this recording. There's been, I think we're close to 150 episodes aired. And then in the mindset section, which like that's huge, a huge topic. But I think there's like 8 or 9 episodes that I just really wanted people to focus on and consider. I think it's something that's lacking is this balanced approach, and not just how we do policing, but like how we approach life, because they absolutely parlay and build onto each other. I think that the better you show up as a dad, as a husband, the better cop you're going to be. Whereas my younger self, my immature, undeveloped self would have been like, no, I got to spend more time doing cop stuff, working with cops, absorbing cop content, all that stuff.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I think mindset is one of those things you need to be constantly cultivating and developing, and having the right mindset and the right frame of reference is what makes some people better at the job. And a lot of being a good cop is being well balanced and being able to see people as your fellow human beings and interact with them accordingly, instead of just doing the job like a robot, you know?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that what you mentioned about for you, your wife and daughter, and that I would synonymize that with like your North Star, right? Like your ultimate purpose is being of service and demonstrating yourself or actualizing your best version of yourself for them. And that's what was really helpful for me. And I've talked about this recently in a podcast, where I finally put pen to paper on like my personal values and writing them all out and charting them and having to read them. And yeah, there is a piece where I talk about my profession, but then I have to be honest and humble and check the ego, be like, okay, I can't make it all about police, but ultimately I know things in my day to day, whatever profession, if I'm even not allowed to do this job because something happens to me physically or mentally, like I want to be of service to people, right? And ultimately I want to be the type of guy that is being a model example to those that are looking at me. And that could be cops in this frame of life. And then if I leave police work, it might not be cops, right? But ultimately, somebody that's always looking at me that I have to show up the right way, or I would deeply, deeply regret it, and hope that I never do something that would compromise that by sticking to those values, are my wife and daughter. So I feel that, man.
Yeah, I agree. And that kind of just reminded me as you were talking, it reminded me of a call I had this week where some random citizen called because it came out as what's in our state of 5150, but it's like a mental health hold. And this guy called because he was just kind of at his wit's end, and you know he wasn't. He's a younger dude, you know, early 30s, and he's saying he didn't have the job he wants, he's not getting dates, blah blah blah. So my partner and I ended up talking to him for a bit. Didn't go the mental health committal route with him, but it was just like a personal one-on-one mentorship conversation we had. And one, I'm really glad that I work somewhere that somebody sees the police as someone that will have that conversation with them, instead of, I feel like there's a stereotype of people being afraid of calling the police because of X, Y, and Z, but this guy wanted someone to talk to, and it was me, right? And the important thing out of all this is what I kind of gave him the takeaway was, I said, like, hey, you need to sit down and figure out who you are and like what you want, you know? And I said, what defines success for you? And he said, oh, a job or money. And I'm like, that's not like, some of the most unhappiest people I know are very wealthy.
Yeah.
So you need to think of who you are outside of that.
That's huge. I mean, they've done studies on that. And there's these anecdotes of like lottery winners, how, you know, this huge bulk of money, not only does it not fix their problems, but it oftentimes exacerbates them, right? So like, what is the thing? I recently heard in this like kind of podcast audiobook, I can't remember the exact title, so I can't share it, but essentially it was someone that like won the lottery and like gave it all back, or like donated it all away. I don't think they gave it back, but they got rid of it because they ultimately recognized they had a lot of good regularity and like balance in their life. I keep using the word balance, and that's okay. I'd love to use other words, but maybe that just is a driving point of this whole thing. But yeah, it did not elevate their lifestyle in all those ways. And this might be a way to bring that up because different psychologists talk about what makes what people really need, like after like Maslow's hierarchy, right? Like your survival needs, and ultimately it comes to things like being valued, right? So purpose, like have a purposeful life, and like being appreciated, right? And so I think that even in that example, you're talking to this guy and you're trying to share that, but in showing up and trying just to bridge and be there for him, and not this super awesome, like cool, badass call, like you're on the SWAT team, like there's a lot of exciting stuff, but ultimately that's what someone needed, and you were willing to be there.
Yeah. And I know we talked about this leading up to this conversation, but I don't know if for those listening, there's a video. I posted it on Police Post Training a while back, but there was a a veteran who was kind of trying to do a suicide by cop route, and the officer that responded was this like 6'4" paratrooper veteran. And the thing that sticks with me from watching that body cam footage is the cop says, "Hey, the good Lord sent me today. He didn't send another one of these guys. He sent a fellow veteran." And the thing that sticks out the most from that, apart from the fact that this dude, the cop ends up breaking down and crying at the end when he's able to get the guy some help instead of having to shoot him, because that's the route it originally was looking like it was going. But the concept of being, you brought up purpose, right? And that's, for me, a relatively recent revelation of acting like I belong in that room. I was sent there. I have a purpose for being there. And even on calls that maybe going into it, I'm feeling slightly annoyed by, if I reframe all that with that mindset that it's me here, not someone else. And, maybe there's a reason, maybe there isn't, but I'm going to act like there is. I'm going to act like it's my purpose to be there at that specific moment in time. And I think that's so helpful for having a positive outcome on my calls, because it just reframes, even if I'm really irritated going into it, because it sounds like a silly call, giving myself that kind of mental grounding before I start dealing with that person. I've noticed a really positive trend since I started doing that.
Yeah, I love that. And I love not just the outcome, but like the positive outlook, right? So even if sometimes we can't affect the type of outcome we want, but we can show up and give it our best, like oftentimes that has to be enough. We deal with so many negativities, and we deal with contingencies where even if something ends up okay, like we have to be prepared responsibly for things going like a really bad way. But
Sure.
all to say that I think that it might be a little woo, right? But there are the concepts of, what is this person here to teach me? Like, what do I have to learn from this person? Not like get from them, but like, no, learn from this person. And that might be patience, right? That might be humility. That might be some empathy, right? Like we can talk about these things, and I'm not trying to introduce this like I know it all, and I'm like, no, I'm extremely judgy at times. I'm extremely impatient at times. But if I'm on that call, perhaps like it forces me to regroup and be like, okay, it's not about me. Like I'm here to do a job, and I'm here to serve. That's what I signed up for, is to serve. And this person's going through it, and I have a really great life when I go home at the end of the day. And so like a little bit of just kind of reframe of like, okay, how can I affect the situation in a positive way? And then also recognize that's not just me doing it for them, but I could be doing something for me too.
Yeah. And that's I think it's Ralph Waldo Emerson that says every man I meet is in some way my superior, right? Going into every call with some type of humility and being willing to learn from the situation, but also reflecting on it after the fact and being able to kind of celebrate your own wins after the fact is huge for continuing to have a positive outlook on the job, instead of I think if you don't reflect on stuff and you're not learning, but also you kind of need to reward yourself in some way mentally.
Yeah.
And when you can walk away from a situation, especially one where either you were able to be that person, the right person at the right time, or you were able to calm a situation down that was looking like it would go the other way. Those are huge wins mentally, and that helps you continue to grow and get better and to be ultimately then at the end of the day, we're all human beings, right? We're all, going through hurtling on this giant rock, millions of miles a year. And being able to see your fellow human being as a fellow human being. And like you said, people are having bad days sometimes, or bad years, or bad lives, right? And being able to be that right person, and also not to judge people, and understand that we're in very different places because a ton of different situations have presented themselves in one way or another. And that's why I'm here in my capacity, and that person's there in their capacity, right? So being able to give people a little bit of grace, because ultimately people don't call the police or don't interact with us because they're having the best of days, right? And if one of my family members was having a bad day, what type of cop would I want to show up to help them, or to deal with them? Even if someone's a suspect, doesn't mean that they've lost their humanity, right? They're still a human being.
Yeah. There are, and I think that when you have real talk with a lot of cops, they're like, yeah, most people, I guess I'm gonna reframe what I was about to say, but like most people can recognize that you make bad choices, you make mistakes, okay, what have you. And then there's that sliver that I think a lot of cops are like, no, there's also pure evil, right? So I'm not talking about those people, but we all make mistakes, and we all make them to varying degrees, and we all had a different, what the life we came into and the course we went down, right? And that's not to make excuses for anybody, but it is just to recognize we're human, right? And I think that one thing that, whether it's right or wrong, but it's a way that you can try to look at the world. And this is coming from a very angry young man that was me and is a part of me still. But when you recognize that people oftentimes do the best they know how to, you're not making any excuses for them or their actions or anything like that, but it's just how they're showing up or what they're doing. They may not have had the outlook. They may not have had even the reflection that you've had. So I like that piece of reflection, because you're a fan of journaling. We talked about that in the first episode. And since then, I can say I journal much more frequently after talking to you about that and recognizing how it's helpful for me. But in reflection, one thing that popped in my mind as you're talking about that is our reward systems, right? Like, it is essentially, you're talking about like recognizing the value, or like that good moment or that good reflection point in an industry where so many of us come into this job and we get these really, really, really high highs and we get these really low lows. And we can essentially, I believe, get dulled to a lot of this because after a certain while of time, like all these high speed pursuits, like you don't get the rise that you used to. In the foot pursuit, you don't get the adrenaline spike you used to. And the rest, you don't get the adrenaline spike you used to. So like refocusing that, and again, making it more about purpose and how you're showing up in all these little ways, I think is huge. And truly, I do have that. Like I have some really exciting stories and calls that I look back on in kind of glory days, fun way, and fun to talk to my old buddies about. But at the same time, there's so many of those little moments that I know we talked about and kind of bounced some ideas around before recording, where those are some of the little organic, kind of special, intimate interactions I had as a cop. Some really good conversations, breaking ground, if you will, where I felt like there was actually some more significant relationship between two people in a really tense moment. And sometimes, like, to make it about something bigger, is like they had a really good experience with a cop, which they didn't expect. And in some ways, I didn't expect when that conversation started, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and I think, like you said, it's easy to get jaded as you get further and further into this career field. And I brought up the word grace earlier, giving people that grace and that understanding. You're not, like you said, you're not making excuses for bad behavior.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, I think our goal as police officers is ultimately to keep the peace, right? And think of it this way: if you're just being a dick to people that you're arresting because they broke the law and they're a piece of crap and blah 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 blah, are they going to change their ways, or are they going to get further ingrained in that hey, it's the police versus me? Or if you treat them well and you actually legitimately want to see them win and not continue down this, whatever lifestyle they're going down, maybe that's what has that impact. And I'm sure it'd be impossible to quantify that, but I know for a fact that being a jerk to someone just because they broke the law that specific day is not going to make them change or make them a better person. And, on the other end of that, we're kind of talking about the differences between, or not necessarily the differences, but the cool stories and all the high speed stuff. And I find it interesting. I've gotten to train with some very, very high level individuals. And the thing that's interesting to me is the stories about these high level dudes not using force when they could have, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I forget who it is. I think it's Scott, former LAPD Metro guy that teaches for ITTS Tactical. I think it's him that has the saying that the better trained you are, the further you let something devolve, because you are able to make those decisions. And like talking to someone like the LASD, SEB, like their full-time SWAT guys, the stories that stick out the most to me are the stories where someone else would have taken that shot and killed this person. And they're like, there's, this isn't quite it. And they waited and it didn't. And to be clear, I'm not telling anyone to sacrifice officer safety or let yourself get killed.
Yeah.
But like these guys are so high level that one of the examples is they're talking about this veteran they're dealing with, and the guy raised his pistol and he was bringing the gun up to drop the mag and walk the slide to the rear. And nobody shot, even though everybody was up on target and all that. Nobody shot because they just had that discipline and that level of training that they were able to process stuff so much faster than somebody, a really jumpy, nervous individual would, right?
Yeah. No, that's a really good thing to discern, because I think that some people would take that and like that could be a really polarizing comment. But even if there's some people that still hear that and like, man, like you're presenting a weapon, like that's a shoot situation and people are waiting. No, I listen again to what Joey's saying, is that level of training and awareness is so heightened that they're picking apart those inputs as we go. And I think maybe a helpful example is when you have a FATS training system, right? You have that like simulator type, like shoot, no shoot training. And if you have community members, and this is not to disparage them, this is just to highlight the difference in training. When you have community members, there's pretty viral, kind of local news segment that went in, and the reporter was absolutely terrified after one shooting like the hostage or something like that, just because they saw a stimulus, they saw the person, and then they were like emotionally, like just kind of crumbling because of that, right? So we can see that is a drastic difference in mindset, purpose, vocation even, right? And then the training that comes with all those things. Whereas you'd like to think that your average cop in a FATS simulator, in a shoot, non-shoot, and I'm not talking about like the perfect marksmanship, but like I'm saying like you'll recognize better than the average person when something's out of view and when a gun's coming up or whether a cell phone's coming up. And then this is someone that's trained on the spectrum much, much, much farther past that average cop level.
Yeah. And I do want to drive home the point that I'm not saying to sacrifice officer safety or to let yourself get killed. I am encouraging you to be of a very high level of training that you are able to make those decisions and process information better than the average person. And I mean, in my own career, like my first time when we were doing force on force, when I got on our SWAT team in 2017, like when the first time I had a teammate who was playing the bad guy shoot at me from inside the structure, I just started cranking rounds back with, no sight picture, just,
spray and pray.
Yeah, basically. And it's funny to kind of contrast that now after doing all the training that I've done since then, to see that I'm taking way fewer shots because I'm not reacting emotionally, if you will, to the stimulus. I'm really slowing things down and forcing myself to process all the information I possibly can.
Yeah. No, that's good. And ultimately, I mean, there's enough like kind of trollish culture, and maybe it's not even trollish culture. It's just like prevailing negative culture that's like, well, if someone needs to get shot, they get shot. And like, yes, that's true. Sometimes we as police don't have a choice, but to be able to remove that and offer that other opportunity, which is to not to have to do that, is fantastic. Having and knowing personally people that had to do that and their life will never be the same. And I mean, we could talk about resilience, we could talk about all these different things, but fact is that there's so many folks out there, men and women, that would love to not have had to make that choice, and to save them from that, the stress, the trauma, their family going through it, their agency going through it. Like, and yeah, I'm not trying to go down that hole too much, but like, yeah, it is ultimately, it's a lot. It's human life. But yeah, we gotta grapple with it sometimes.
Yeah, and we touched on it the last time with some of the responses to comments and whatnot, where I essentially said on that podcast, a lot of these people making these bravado comments. So a lot of the people making these bravado comments likely haven't been in these situations. They haven't been in OISs. They haven't been sued. They don't know the stress that entails and what it does to you mentally and emotionally.
Yeah, it's crappy. It's crappy, and again, it goes back to that like even lack of empathy within the culture, right? Like you see an OIS video and you see someone with an emotional reaction, and then all of a sudden people are coming out, the keyboard warriors, like just disparaging this person. I'm like, you don't even know that guy, right? Yeah, but not to digress too much. I'm thinking about a specific one, but yeah, man, more positivity, more positive outlook. Certainly, we could use a lot more of it.
For sure.
So when we talk about all these moments, let's talk about people skills and some of those things that that you've recognized in your career that have really helped things along. And you've already started to talk about that. You talked about that in the prior episode as well.
Yeah, you always have an opportunity to practice your people skills anytime you're dealing with people. And one of my new favorite things to do is talk to Lyft drivers and have like really good, deep, meaningful conversations.
Sometimes that's dangerous.
Over,
You're like, oh man, what is this other life, this person?
Yeah, over the weekend my best friend got married down in San Diego, so I flew down there and I was taking Lyfts all around. Side note, awesome wedding. It happened to be on my daughter's second birthday, and my best friend and his wife like had a little mini cupcake for her and had everyone sing happy birthday in the middle of the wedding. So it's super nice of them.
That's nice.
Right after my best man speech. Yeah, the Lyft drivers, right? I noticed, for whatever reason, just luck of the draw or whatever, I tend to get a lot of Lyft drivers that are immigrants, and specifically from like the last few I've had, Syria, Iraq, Ukraine. And my favorite thing to do is to ask my immigrant Lyft drivers what's their favorite thing about America and what's their least favorite thing about America. Mm-hmm. And it's so interesting. Every single one of them, of those that I just mentioned, they said their favorite thing about America is freedom. Yeah. And then of those three individuals that I just mentioned, two of them said that they don't even have anything bad to say about America.
Wow.
And the Iraqi gentleman said his complaint is that his kids went to school and came back with they started using profanity that they learned at school. So and all that is to say,
speech, it's slippery.
Exactly. All that is to say, though, that's one of those things where in these short rides that I'm having with these individuals, I'm getting into kind of deep conversations, and you have the opportunity to do that everywhere and anywhere you go, whether it's the grocery store, whether it's riding in a Lyft, and then that all translates to how you talk to people on duty. And sometimes you show up as a fill unit on a traffic stop and you're hanging out with the person while the primary officer's taking their information back and doing a driver's license check and all that. That's a good opportunity to work on those people skills. All it is, like I said earlier, it's just seeing your fellow human being as a fellow human being, and regardless of the circumstances, you can still have these conversations. And I've had some really, really deep and interesting conversations with people I was taking to jail. And it's funny because one in particular that I'm thinking of, the guy found my email like when he was released, and like sending me an email to thank me for like that conversation. And it's just interesting to see how much of an impact you can have just by having these just regular conversations with people.
Yeah. A couple things come to mind. One is that we talk about officer safety, and you're the admin for police post training, and so like critical theme in that, right? And we talked earlier about stereotypes, and are you being the cop that's fulfilling the stereotype of people out in the street? Let's just even say suspects, because if we want to talk about officer safety, one of the things you could do that will certainly promote general officer safety is being respectful and kind, when you can afford to. And certainly when someone's under control, I mean, it could even be like not talking to them because they're just, they're bouncing off the inside of your car and trying to kick out the window. Cool. Like you restrain them and you get on about your business, but you don't need to disparage them, right? Because ultimately, whether or not you're fulfilling those negative stereotypes or you're challenging them, that could dramatically affect the next cop that has to interact with this person that doesn't know their history, doesn't know the context. It might be that random traffic stop, or it might be they're arriving to a disturbance, and that person's not even the subject of it. They're just standing there, right? And is that person going to become a problem because of you being an a-hole? And I'm saying let's like I'm including me in that because I have certainly been an a-hole a lot of times. I'm not proud of, and that's why I want to talk about it. It's like, no, I'll put myself under the microscope and recognize that I had my human moments, but I like to think I've learned from them, and I like to think that I have fewer of them because we think about these things and because we talk about them.
Yeah, I think it's interesting to kind of see the reaction that you produce in how you treat people. And I've had a ton of times where I show up and, I'm never going to tell people to sacrifice officer safety. But like you said, you can actually promote officer safety in how you treat people. And if you're being a professional and you're being respectful, and that doesn't mean, I'm sure that some people that hear this are going to say, oh, he's this soft, weak California cop or whatever, blah, blah, blah. I don't have anything to prove to people. I'm not worried about being seen, I'm not sacrificing officer safety. I can talk to people professionally, and I've frequently found that showing up on calls where people are all pissed off with the other officer that they're dealing with, and I come in and I'm talking to them, and I'm not sacrificing officer safety, but I'm being respectful and I'm helping them see things from our perspective. Like I said earlier, like no one's going to see things from your perspective if you're being a dick. They're going to get further entrenched in their own ways, and they're going to continue to see things the way that they've been seeing things. The way to break through to that person is to slow things down and get them to see things from your perspective. And you don't do that by being disrespectful or authoritarian. You get that by talking to them as another human being. And I've had tons of times where that's been the case, where I show up and everyone's yelling at everybody. And, I'm able to kind of pick out who to talk to. And I've had so many of these times where, because I'm engaging with this one person, they're like, hey, telling their other people to like, hey, come over here. Like, everybody calm down. Let's be cool, blah, blah, blah. And that's the best. That's why I keep saying people skills are probably one of the most important things, if not the most important thing you can have on this job.
Yeah, I love it. And a couple things popping in my mind. One is that the troll will say you're pandering, and it's like, okay, you're also just like communicating effectively. You could even say you're persuading them to be less angry. And Joey and I were talking, I mean, it took a while to schedule this because, this is what happens with two busy guys and dads. But one of the ideas I had was like going through this list of characteristics that are helpful to be a cop. And this is actually just pulled from Indeed. But the first one that they list, common skills for police officers, active listening, which absolutely we talked about that. And then persuasiveness. And the wrong type of energy, the wrong type of people can think of persuasiveness in this like authoritarian way, right? Like you're trying to manipulate someone, but no, it's just getting someone to convince them to take a certain course of action. And that's de-escalation, right? That's just literally bringing peace, right? That peacemaker, peacekeeper role of police. One example is like literally post George Floyd's death, like the riots, and me and someone else being one of my buddies. I'll actually just name him. He's been on the podcast a couple times, but Trevor. We were on the civil disturbance team, and we're in a neighboring city, and we're guarding the city hall in the traditional line, which is like not awesome. I mean, it is because it's important at times, but it just sucks to be there and have people just chipping at you and like throwing granola bars, and you wondering if someone's going to throw a brick and hoping that they don't, and hoping that your Overwatch is covering that. All these things.
Or
anyway,
a piss bottle.
Yeah, all that. So luckily, I never caught that. But this was just like more of a very chippy subjects, and at a certain point, like if you mouth off, like one, you're doing no one any good. You're fulfilling stereotypes, and then you look unprofessional. But mostly, what happens on the line, in my experience and observation, is people are just, they're just stoic. You're stoic face. You don't have any reaction. You're trying not to let anything affect you. You're trying not to show any emotion. But man, one thing that I love about this memory and the story was that Trevor just, someone's just saying all this hateful, profane things. He's like, you want this, you're just a robot. You just like, you want to, just like, you want to abuse and hurt and subjugate, people of color and all these things. He's like, I don't want that. And they were, for a second, they're like, he speaks, and this one gal, this one white gal is just in his face, like borderline in his face, not sacrificing officer safety, but like just chipping at him and just like, oh, you're going to talk to me now? And then just like berating him. He's like, no, I don't feel like that at all. He's like, oh, you're just going to follow orders. You're a puppet. You're going to do whatever. If your boss tells you to hit me with a stick, you're going to hit me. He's like, I wouldn't do that. My boss is right here. And so they all look at me and I'm like, yeah, I wouldn't do that. Like, why would I do that? You're just yelling at us. Like, that's not illegal, like free speech. And then they're like, they get more and more intrigued. And this gal just keeps like screaming at us. And eventually the crowd around her tells her to shut the F up. He's trying to speak. So they actually are there because they want to engage. They have their grievances. They have their perceptions. And we could have chosen to confirm their biases, or we could have shown up as Trevor modeled. He was just like a dude. He's a dude with a job. He's like, my job is to protect people, and that's where I'm wearing all this stuff in case someone throws something at me. Like, hopefully I don't get hurt too bad. And if someone comes out of the woodwork and starts trying to assault you, I'm going to try to protect you. Hopefully you don't try to assault me. Like, just to have that type of organic conversation where they were so caught off guard. And I loved how they just all kind of ganged up on that gal and told her to shut the F up so they could just have a conversation. And we had a conversation. So I'll just say that's a fond memory that pops up as you're describing some of these things we should be thinking about.
Yeah. And it kind of reminds me of the quote, and it goes something to the effect of, rudeness is the weak person's imitation of strength. And so if somebody's being super rude and vile and nasty to me, or, to you, stooping to that level accomplishes nothing. And why would I want to associate my character with that type of action?
Mm-hmm.
I'm better than that. And all of us should be too.
Yeah. And another idea, I'll just throw it out there. When I was texting with Joey, I was like, hey, what about bringing in some Miyamoto Musashi quotes and rolling them and like kind of playing off of them? But one that stuck out to me that I did take note of, that I find very appropriate in this, is, if you wish to control others, you must control yourself. And thinking about controlling others, that could go back with that kind of authoritative thing. But no, it's like, how do you want to navigate with others? How do you want to affect others and maybe bring them down? Maybe gain compliance. Hopefully gain compliance, right? Like, that is a lot of our job at times. De-escalate them. If you want to control others, you must control yourself, right? So it goes back to that stoicism of like, you are in charge of your emotions, and if someone else is in charge of them, then like, that is not good. Like, you can't even manage yourself. You can't manage your emotions, and we know how frustrating things can be. But that goes right back to that like rational brain. If we want to be optimized, professional, and rational, like, we got to keep that in check and have a full grasp of it.
Yeah, and for those that haven't read The Book of Five Rings by Miyamoto Musashi, I know it's not as well known in America as maybe the art of war, but it's interesting to see some of these Stoic concepts and philosophies playing out in his writing, even though obviously he was a Japanese swordsman, not a Stoic philosopher. But that's a really good one. Just being in control of yourself and recognizing your own strength, right?
Yeah. It's I love it, and yes, plug for that book because it's an easy read too. And so if people aren't like real readers or like audiobook, but Art of War is a lot. It's a lot to get through that thing.
Super long, yep.
I've picked it up and I've set it down many times. Yeah, Book of Five Rings, very tangible. Great little anecdotes and quotes. So yeah,
Yep.
shout out to
Strong
Eminem,
recommendation.
the OG, greatest swordsman who ever lived.
That's good.
Yeah. What else?
I say we talk a little more about some more Musashi quotes, man. You put up some good ones in our little group chat, so
Okay. What's the next one that pops up to you that you want to riff off of?
I like the think lightly of yourself and deeply of the world.
What does
That's
that
a good one.
evoke in you, and maybe for your interaction with like your police career?
I think there's an aspect of don't take things too seriously, and that's not to say that we shouldn't be taking things seriously and we shouldn't be serious when we need to be. But a lot of the stuff that people catastrophize over is, in the grand scheme of things, really not that big of a deal. And overstating your own importance and your own ego, I think, is the downfall of many a police officer.
Yep. And a lot of times, yes, and I recognize that in myself, and from personal experience, some of the most unhappy times at work and some of the most stressed I've been, it's not been like a call. A lot of times it's organizational stress or boss stress. And when I really felt my eyeballs burning, I mean, like, why? And looking back, it felt so stupid. And yeah, it was foundational for me to develop my own sense of leadership and what was important to me. But my point in bringing this up is like, it's an over identity piece again, right? To come back to that, like I made it so much in my whole world. It was like what was going on in the walls and the politics of the PD, but why? Like I still have this whole life, and this is a job that I might do for 15 more years. I might do it for 5. I don't know, and I might not have a choice. But again, it's as you stated, right? Like overstating your own importance and check that ego, right? Like I'm a guy doing this job, and the sky isn't falling. There's just some drama going on at work. It's fine. We can come back and do it the next day. Or if it really is so terrible, I should leave and go do something else or go do this job somewhere else. And I say that from my own experience of feeling so overwhelmed with, this stress or this emotion. But I know a lot of people feel that way, with certain things that might be happening at work or around work. So just is an offering to that, right? And that goes right back to like, what are your core values? Like, what are the things in your life, your mission? What is your most critical mission? And thinking about that, I find very grounding.
Yeah, and I do encourage people, just like I told that kid last week, like sit down, ask yourself what's important to you, what defines success. And then it's like I told this kid, if you go on a road trip, you need to know where you're going, right? And a lot of people are just kind of floating through life and they don't know where they're going. So they don't know how to get there. And I think figuring out where you want to get before you do anything is kind of the most important thing, especially when it comes to, we've been talking about defining purpose and figuring out what has value to you. And if you don't know what that is to you, then you're not going to be able to get it, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And then even in the context of career, talking to some younger guys more recently about, certain roles that they're interested in, and they're worried about this, and what if they don't get it that round, and then they put too many eggs in a basket. And what I've invited people to do, and this younger officer to do, is like, think about how you want to develop yourself. And yes, like have that maybe in the sight picture, right? But not over fixate on that. Like think about how you can continue to seek skill development and purpose in that. And right. And it's essentially an invitation to like make the process like part of the goal. and then you may or may not even know if that role exists, in so many years. But I think that sometimes without having that multi-directional awareness, I suppose, is that we can lose the forest through the trees, kind of.
Yeah, exactly. I agree with that.
This might be a good one to end on. You must understand that there is more than one path to the top of the mountain.
That's a good one, especially since we're recording this. Today's Friday, right? Friday after the election.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm noticing a lot of people on social media essentially berating people for not having their same values or point of view.
Yeah.
And understanding that everyone has different experiences and different things are important to different people. And I find it kind of astonishing how people will write people off for not having the exact same mindset and perspective as them. That's
sure.
just weird to me, especially, when it's their own family. And I'm saying all this just kind of as a non-emotionally involved observer, just watching people post some of the stuff that they're saying. And it's interesting,
Yeah,
to say the least.
Yeah.
But taking it back to the Musashi quote, different things are going to work for different people, right? And what works for me works because I've spent a very long time very deliberately cultivating the mindset that I have. It's not necessarily going to work for everybody, especially if you haven't put any of that same thought process into having a similar mindset. You can't just pick it up and start running with it. It's been something that's been a long time in the making, from doing martial arts and from the experiences I've had through the military, through law enforcement, through being a father, and all the reading and studying I've done. So different things are going to be different for different people.
Yeah. No, absolutely. Like context and individualization is what I get from that. And I love that you brought up the election. It's actually something that was in my thoughts as you're talking about, the immigrant Lyft drivers. And because tensions are so high, and I'm not trying to cast judgment or disparage anyone where emotions are high in these Facebook comments or social media posts, or just how people actually feel and what they're putting out in the world. You have a right to your opinions. You have a right to your speech. And that is the beauty of this country we call America. But to the point of those drivers to say, yes, we have freedom. I think that's really grounding again, right? And just to circle back, and as you put in episode 67, our prior conversation, but like to take inventory and kind of taking stock of what you have in a sense. And yeah, it's fantastic that we can have this extreme debate. You can post just about whatever you want. But what I would challenge, and I think it goes back to that greater picture, like outside of ourselves and our egos, and once we're all gone from this earth, or you and I, it's not about adopting Joey's mindset. It's not about adopting mine. But yes, please work and cultivate your own, and you will find a strong believer that you'll find this resilience through whatever times are coming. It is this strange dynamic when you have people that are saying, hey, you're unfollowed, unfriended, whatever, like disconnected. Whereas if your literal next door neighbor said the same thing in passing, or that, they have the other candidate stuff up on their porch, are you going to build the fence actually higher? And you're going to make a point to like literally not say hi if they say hi to you at the mailbox? Like, I hope not, right? Because 2 weeks ago it was fine and now it's not. And so I know that can even sound preachy to some, but what I'm trying to say is focus on your locus of control. I think a lot of this whole conversation and our prior conversation is just like, it starts with you, bringing that balance, essentially that resilience, that mindset that can help you navigate the storm and keep your ship steady. And that's really, that's one of my biggest takeaways from the energy you put out and your conversations and what I've been able to gain from that. And so I really appreciate that. I think we need a lot more of that.
Yeah. And just going back to kind of that election piece we were talking about and what you just said, we brought up earlier, hey, if we're dealing with someone that we're arresting, are we going to get through to that person by being a jerk to them? And I think the same thing goes for some of the people that I've seen posting on social media where, hey, if you voted this way, like you're dead to me, blah, blah, blah.
Mm-hmm.
Is that an effective way of getting somebody to see your perspective and maybe voting your way next go round? It doesn't seem to be to me. I don't know. Maybe I'm wrong, but I don't think I am.
It's not how
You
you
know,
persuade. Yeah,
it sounds unreasonable and completely lacking in nuance.
it is. It is. And ultimately, like I suppose I'll share this last story because it connects with a lot of the things we're talking about. But we're talking about upset people, and yeah, we go to a lot of calls. People are really upset, and they kind of diffuse. Time helps. Sometimes they are not diffused, and that's what becomes a complaint, and that's what your supervisor has to deal with. So this is the level of complaint that got up to me as a newer commander, and I will say again, putting that humility and ownership hat on of my mistakes, sharing my mistakes so you don't make them, hopefully, as all of you leaders and up and coming leaders are. As a younger, immature sergeant, I'll put it that way, I felt so much a duty to protect my guys and stand up for them in this very visible, overt way, to the point where showing up and someone's complaining, I'd say, like, I mean, with some evidence, but like, I'd be like, you're wrong. Like, I don't really care to hear your thing. Like, my officers were totally fine. They were justified in their actions. And unless you got anything else, we're done. That's a pretty extreme example, but ultimately, that type of response is exactly what we're talking about, right? Someone had a perception, whatever it was, they had a perception, and I basically, through my interaction, confirmed all of their perception by having that interaction. Whereas this other example I'll tell you about is that this mom called in, had real concerns about how her daughter was treated on a call. And I watched the body cam, and ultimately the mom didn't want to watch the body cam because she had her perception based on her account given to her by her daughter. And that says a lot too, right? It says that she didn't want her perception to be challenged in that way. But ultimately, I did what Joey is teaching us to do, which is to listen, like actually listen. And I got berated for quite a while on the phone. I made sure just to hold that uncomfortable space where I wanted to answer something, I wanted to offer something, but I just waited until she had expressed everything I felt. I asked some follow-up questions. She ranted a little bit more, if I could put it that way. And ultimately, I offered some things from as best of a space as I could to say, hey, ma'am, I watched the body cam and this is what I saw. And that does align with our training. And I can see your daughter's perception that she felt that this happened. I'm not seeing it on body cam. And then it became all these other things about police are always this way and you're not going to be this or you're always going to be that. But because I just continued to actively listen and actually try to listen and not argue her point, eventually she got where I was coming from, and she did concede this. She said she didn't want to come into my station because it was oppressive, and she didn't want it for her life. And I was like, okay. But she did say, although I feel all these things about police, I appreciate you giving me the time and actually hearing me out. I went out on a limb. I got a little bit uncomfortable with this, but I said, ma'am, with what you're saying about police, and even though I feel like we've had a very cordial, professional conversation as you've kind of relayed, I feel that you're being very prejudicial against me because you've cast me in this light of just because I'm a police officer. And she said, yes, that is true. And she said it was unfortunate, and how if we were neighbors and I was out of the uniform, she'd sure we'd be friends and we could probably cook out together and be just fine. So that might sound like a strange story, but I took that story as a huge win because ultimately she admitted that she was being prejudicial. And that's not like I win, but that's to say that I feel like I made some reasonable, I suppose, ground on her challenging her own narratives, and the fact that she really truly feels like all cops are messed up. She could concede that we had a good interaction, and that outside the uniform, I was just a dude, right? It goes back to that, hey, I'm just a person. We're just people trying to connect.
Yeah. And I think if you can get that even in uniform, that's optimal, where people recognize that it is a uniform, but there's a human underneath it, right?
It might be optimistic, it might be idealistic, but I'd like to think that phone conversation, I'd like to think that sets the stage for her to challenge her beliefs a little bit more. Or maybe the next officer she interacts with, she's like, no, you're actually cool. You're actually cool. So, and that's the best we can do. I mean, like, we can't require that, but we can certainly, hope for it. And I mean, that's just a piece of what I have to offer, or what I think that we should be considering as we do all our things, professionally and safely and the best we can, because that's all we can really control, right? We can only control us.
Yep. Another stoic concept.
Yeah, man. Joey, another great time down the rabbit hole of mindset and personal thoughts and reflections, mission, values. Is there anything you'd like to leave the listeners with?
Yeah, so the last one was everyone has a story. Always be willing to hear someone else's and make your own one worth telling. Today's thing I'll leave with people is how we do anything is how we do everything.
Man, I've shared that with officers in a very challenging way, and I love that. It's really one piece of the whole, right? Where can folks find you or reach out?
Of course, the personal page is 9mm.musashi. You have to type in the whole thing because Instagram has me shadow banned. And then Police Post Training is the other page that I run.
Man, why do you think they shadow banned you?
Probably because I put up firearms content on the Musashi page.
That's
you can't find that page unless you type in the entire username.
All right. Well, check out the show notes, folks, and you will find him. Thanks again, Joey.
Hey, thanks for having me on. It was a pleasure being here with you.
Thank you for tuning into another episode of Blue Grit Radio. As always, support this community by subscribing, giving us a 5-star review, and following, liking, and sharing posts on Blue Grit Wellness on Instagram. You can reach me there or email me at bluegritwellness@gmail.com. Be well and stay gritty.